Hello everyone, I'm Gareth Mitchell. Welcome along to Digital Planet. Today, what the aftermath of the crypto crash looks like, up close and personal. And also, there's a new controller on the block for gamers with disabilities. We'll be looking into the future and also what's been going on more recently in that whole field of accessibility for gamers. And we're going to have comment as we go along from none other than Glenn Boddington this week. So what else might we have?
Hi, Gareth. Hi. Well, we're going to be looking at those motion capture suits that they use in films like Avatar. However, now, these are going to they're now helping diagnose serious muscle diseases earlier. So, a serious approach to motion capture.
Right. Looking forward to hearing all about that. But first, how the collapse in crypto has turned digital gold mines into junkyards in Kazakhstan. Bitcoin is worth about a third what it was in late 2021, thanks partly to the collapse of the FTX crypto exchange and the Terra stablecoin. Now that's made a whole load of mining facilities, in other words, big processing centres where new coins are minted, economically unviable. Kazakhstan became something of a crypto goldmine during the highs thanks to its subsidised electricity, light touch regulation and plenty of spare land. Now a load of mining centres lie abandoned. Investigative journalist Peter Guest has been telling me about his visit to the country.
So Kazakhstan was, for a very brief period, the second biggest location for Bitcoin mining in the world. Most of that was because it has this huge surplus of coal power. I went to some of the towns in the kind of Rust Belt in the northeast of the country, and some of the mines I saw were enormous. These huge facilities hooked up to massive banks of transformers and then onwards to coal power stations. And in some of the towns I saw, some of the mines were individually, not collectively, individually using several times over the amount of power the town needed. You know, they were able to use kind of tax breaks to get around the outside of paying their way, in a sense. There was some corruption which led to some of them just operating illegally. They weren't really giving much back. They weren't employing many people. And so gradually, bit by bit, their welcome was being eroded. And then when the spike really happened, when the economics of the business meant that so many more people came to Kazakhstan, they actually overloaded the grid. This was a country that used to export power, and suddenly it's having to import power from Russia at a high cost. Now, that's something that isn't just happening in Kazakhstan. It's actually happened in several places where the industry has turned up. And actually, even as the Bitcoin price was still high, the mining industry was kind of losing its basis of operations. And one miner I spoke to who'd been part of this kind of global caravan said, there's just nowhere left. Nowhere wants us anymore.
Absolutely. And if in the Kazakhstan example, here you had tax breaks that were being funded by oil revenue, wasn't it? So, and they were intended to build tech businesses. They wanted unicorns coming out of Kazakhstan. They wanted a new Silicon Valley. And what they ended up with were a whole load of often quite underground crypto mining operations where the wealth that was being generated couldn't be converted into fiat currency in Kazakhstan. So the wealth was leaving the country, and then everyone else in the country was paying the price through power cuts and outages because of the grid being overloaded. Was that it?
Effectively so, yes. And I think this is something that we've seen in a lot of the kind of crypto mining industry, is that it's drawn to places where it can, to an extent, exploit local regulations or lack of. It's drawn to kind of places where perhaps there is some weak oversight, weak governance, corruption. It's gone to places where they're kind of geopolitical grey areas, where maybe it's not quite clear who's in charge, and so you don't necessarily have to pay the bills. And that's because there's this relentless search for a little bit more of a profit margin by maybe not paying tax, maybe paying a little bit less electricity, maybe getting advantage of those subsidies. And again, because the Bitcoin price has fallen, it's become more and more and more important to find those cheat codes.
And China got cold feet around like 2021. It got cold feet about crypto, and so it closed down a lot of its operations. Kazakhstan, or certainly the mining operations in Kazakhstan, they benefited from this, didn't they? It was a big rush to Kazakhstan from China.
Absolutely. So China banned Bitcoin mining in kind of spring, summer 2021, and that left a lot of companies and individuals who had their mining machines, they're called ASICs, operating there. They had to find somewhere new. And, you know, we had stories of people booking jumbo jets and flying these things out to wherever they could go to. So some went to the US, some went to Russia, but a lot of them went to Kazakhstan, which was very close by and had this spare capacity.
When you talk about chartering a jumbo jet to take a whole load of the mining equipment with them, it gives a sense of the scale. And one thing about your article is you really brought home to me the scale of these mining operations. They are, or they were, enormous. We're talking about 150 megawatts of power, for instance. Can you just describe one of these operations? It's more than just a room full of PC clusters, isn't it?
Exactly, and this is one of the things I find most fascinating about the industry is that cryptocurrency, Bitcoin in particular, started out as a kind of something you could do on your home computer. But now you go to some of these mines, and a couple of the ones that I went to see in northeast Kazakhstan, they are compounds, huge compounds with these barn-sized buildings just filled with computers, and the noise is extraordinary. There's this roar of ventilation fans, there's heat washing out of it. I mean, Kazakhstan in October, November, it is cold. It's sort of -8 with wind chill, and it's warm there. You're sort of standing outside these barns, and the air coming out is like the outflow from a sauna. They are vast and surrounded by fences, surrounded by armed guards, but kind of abandoned because you're in the middle of nowhere. The nearest industry is a coal mine, and you have to drive for miles and miles and miles just to get to these places. And there's maybe a handful of security guards and a couple of people watching the machines.
Where are we now then, or where is Kazakhstan now? You talk about these huge mining operations. Are they just sitting there now rotting away, gathering dust? Have they stripped them and sold the computers as assets or something? What has happened to them?
So many have. A lot of people who could get out got out in the start of 2022, or middle of 2022. So the government decided to crack down, I think, after some social tension that led to some protests in January, and the grid was really creaking, and they were starting to realize that this was just not sustainable. So they cracked down, they seized equipment from the illegal miners or forced them to close down, and then massively increased the amount they had to pay for electricity and cut some of them off entirely. So they just could not operate. So a lot of international players just left. Again, we heard stories of people running for the border with trucks filled with machines, heading to Siberia, heading to China. But some of the others are still there. The local entrepreneurs can't really leave. They've built facilities to host other people's mines, and they're running them, but they're running them at a loss or with a very small margins, using power that they're buying at a great cost from Russia.
That's Peter Guest. So, Glenn Boddington, at 1 minute everyone's kind of rushing in across the border with lorryfuls of computer equipment. The next minute they're driving it across the border away from Kazakhstan as quickly as they can.
I know.
What just happened?
Such a rapid rise and fall story, yes, here of cryptocurrency. But of course it could and does happen with other emerging high-tech technologies that are overhyped too early. And they're taken up by countries to push as new industrial opportunities to boost their economies. But due to the generation of heat from these data mines is what's really concerning me, and that was mentioned here. And also from other massive data storage farms worldwide. This is a huge sustainability issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and I suppose one of the issues here is how these the whole crypto system is outside the, as it were, the mainstream regulated economy, and that has an impact in terms of its environmental regulation or lack of it.
This is the problem, isn't it? And it brings up the bigger questions that are out there about what crypto is doing. Is the sustainability issue, but also social and economic issues. And I think I'm going to have to.
Okay, Glenn, I think you need to have a little bit of a cough. What we're going to do is just move on, and then we may have a chance to talk a bit more about crypto later in the programme. Or are you okay?
Okay, now.
I know it can happen. It happens to me sometimes. You get that dry throat, but if you're back in the game, let's just carry on talking about it.
Some parts of the tech industry are trying to approach this with innovative solutions, using the expended heat at a local level to actually heat, say, houses in the neighbourhood, or to actually heat polytunnels, which are growing fruit and vegetables locally. And that kind of circular and offsetting scenario, that's not so many of them, Gareth, but those ideas are on the table out there across the world.
Right.
And anyway, here we are. We've got a real problem here, though, isn't it? Because it's always smaller, weaker economies that these big companies are going to, because that's where the low price electricities are, etc. And we do need review. I think we need a serious review of actually how and when and what companies can go in and set up where. And then actually look at what happened. We've got this country, Kazakhstan's got big problems from this. It's a kind of pioneer, just do it and run away scenario, which isn't positive for anyone, really.
As we have been hearing there as well, like you say, it doesn't do anybody any good. And what's more, it's very unlikely that anything really useful is going to happen with all those piles of now unused computer equipment. Ghislaine, thank you very much indeed